Okay, so welcome everyone. In this video, we will be going over the basics or the introduction to creating nCloths in Maya. So for those who don't know, an nCloth is according to Autodesk, an nCloth is a fast and stable dynamic solution that uses a system of linked particles to simulate a wide variety of dynamic polygon surfaces. And although that sounds very complicated, essentially what it means, it is a flexible material and it's able to simulate fabrics, balloons, or other deformable objects. So for this tutorial, we will be using nCloths to create fabrics. In the first instant where I used an nCloth in Maya was when I was creating this model bed for the video game. And mainly I used it for this kind of like blanket that's been like draped over, like thrown over the model, because it gives it a more natural look rather than like creating a plane and then just like stretching it over the bed, right? So nCloths are a great tool to use when you want to create these quick, like organic, well, not organic, but these quick models of flexible objects and make it look more natural. So let's go ahead and open a new scene and create a simple nCloth. So an nCloth, what it is, it's two parts. It's going to be the actual nCloth, like the cloth itself, and the collider. And the collider is whatever object it's like colliding against. It could be a table, and like my previous model, it was my bed. It could even just be the floor. So first, I am going to create my collider. And just for a quick example, I'm going to use a sphere. So I'm just going to move this up, scale it a little bit. Okay. And then on the top left corner, you have this drop-down menu. And usually when you open up Maya, you'll be in modeling. But for nCloths, you're going to have to switch it to FX. And as you can see, the top toolbar here changes. And then you have the nCloth option. I'm going to click here and make sure that my object is selected. And then I'm going to click on Create Passive Collider. Once I click on that, I have my collider. Next, I'm going to create my actual cloth. And to do that, I just created a plane. Now I'm just going to add some subdivisions to it. In the channel box layer, inputs, here's where I'll be changing or adding geometry to my plane. I add around like 40 subdivisions, because the more geometry it has, the more dynamic it is, and the more flexible it'll be, and it'll look more like a blanket or a piece of fabric falling over my collider rather than like a tough sheet. So before I make this into an nCloth, I'm just going to go ahead and delete the history. And then just like I did with my collider, I'm going to click on nCloth, create nCloth, and now my plane is an nCloth. And if you look at my outliner here on the left-hand side, it says I've created an nCloth. So I'm just going to move this over the sphere that I made my collider. And on the bottom here, I'm going to press play just so you get an idea of how the simulation looks like. And that is just going to keep falling and falling. But since I pressed stop, it's going to stop falling. So I'm going to play that again. And as you can see, my cloth drops over the collider, but then it keeps sliding off as if it was slippery, right? Let's say this is obviously not the effect you want to do. Let's say you wanted it to hang over the sphere. You would then have to add friction or stickiness to either one of your objects. What I mean by that is that, for example, let's click on my collider. I'm going to go to the attribute editor, and it should be the first drop-down menu where it says collisions. I have these two options that say friction and stickiness. So they're pretty self-explanatory. If you increase the toggles, you're increasing the friction. And if you increase the friction, your cloth doesn't slide around so much. I recommend that you just play around with these until you get your cloth to stick. It doesn't really matter if you use friction or stickiness. It just depends on what you're looking for. And inclusively, you can change these attributes for your cloth as well. So for example, you can make your cloth stickier. And it'll help as well with the actual cloth staying in place. So I'm just going to keep editing this until, let me stop this, until actually I get this cloth to stick. Maybe I'm going to turn down the stickiness so it's not so it doesn't wrap around the sphere. I'm going to restart this, go back to my sphere, increase the friction. And there we go. Finally, it's not falling off. So I pause the playback, and you can pause it whenever you want, whenever you get your desired shape. So I paused it there, right? Okay, so let's say you wanted to export this. Let's say you were making, I don't know, a ghost or whatever, and this is what's the model you wanted to export. So when you create an nCloth and you pause it at a certain moment, what the nCloth does, it creates a mesh of that shape. And if you want to keep that shape, you would have to get rid of your nCloth. And to do that, you have two options. You can either Control D on your computer and duplicate the object. So this object that I just moved away is just the shape of the cloth, and it's no longer an nCloth. It won't it doesn't have that flexibility anymore. And I can't move it around like an nCloth would. And for example, if I click the restart or the replay button, my nCloth resets, right? It turns back into the plane that I originally made and gets rid of this mesh that I used to have. So it's important to either duplicate your mesh and then move it aside, and then you get rid of the plane and then just put that back in, or you can simply delete the history of the nCloth until you essentially don't have the history of it being an nCloth anymore. And then again, you're just left with the shape that it leaves behind. So a shortcut to that is this icon right here. If I click on that and press on the rewind button again. Oh wait, didn't work. In theory, it should stay in place because it's not supposed to be an nCloth anymore. So I'm just going to click on my plane, get rid of the history. And see, I'm clicking on the rewind button and it's not going back into the plane that I originally made. Now it is just the shape and it doesn't have the nCloth anymore. So I'm going to bring in a model of a table that I made. Just to replay this simulation, but with an object that makes a little bit more sense. So with this nCloth, I'm going to give my table a tablecloth, right? So again, to repeat the steps, I'm going to first make my table into a passive collider. I make sure that I'm in the FX tab. Click on nCloth, create passive collider. And then I'm going to make my plane, which will be the actual tablecloth. Remember to add subdivisions so it's more dynamic. I always like to add 40. But you can add in whatever number you see fit. And then with the plane selected, I make it into an nCloth. So when I play it back, the cloth should drape over my table and create a tablecloth. So in this case, I didn't have to tweak the friction and stickiness because I guess the table was enough to stick on and its friction was high enough. And let's say I'm content with that and I want to keep that shape. I'm going to Control D on my keyboard. So I duplicate the mesh. And then if you're not going to keep the nCloth, and let's say this was just a model that you wanted to make and you just wanted to keep the tablecloth as is, then you can just go ahead and click on your mesh, delete it, and then you just move back the copy that you made. So again, to prove that it's not an nCloth, I click rewind and it doesn't go back into the plane. That's how I know that it's just the shape of my cloth now. So finally, whenever you're done with this, whenever you're done modeling, you want to export this. And to export, you go to File, Export All. You name your model. Oops. And if it's like for example, this model is really, really simple. It doesn't have any textures. It's just essentially the geometry of my table and tablecloth. I could go ahead and just export it as an OBJ, as an object. But if you let's say you had textures, or if you wanted to export the whole animation of the nCloth, then you would go ahead and export it as an FBX export. That is the difference between the two, but since mine is relatively simple, I'm just going to keep it as an object and export as is. So that's a really simple nCloth. Another cool material or household object in this case that you can create using an nCloth are curtains. And the principle is pretty much the same. You need a collider and you need your cloth. But to make the curtains, we will be looking at something called Constraint Points, which is like essentially putting points that will be holding onto where the cloth will be holding onto so it stays in place. So like a curtain, you have it hung over a curtain rod, or you sometimes see it like nailed into your wall. Well, technically those are like the constraint points in real life that are holding onto your curtain, right? So to do that, Maya, this time around, first I'm going to create my plane that's going to act as my cloth. I'm going to give it a more rectangular shape this time around. I'm going to rotate this, wrong one. Add divisions, because divisions create better dynamics. Cool. And then with my plane selected, I'm going to make it into an nCloth. And see, for example, if I didn't add any constraint points and I just wanted to make this into a curtain, with the gravity settings on my curtain would just fall into infinity, right? So this is why we're going to add these constraint points. So to do so, you can either make a rectangle or a cylinder. In my case, I'm going to use a cylinder. I'm going to rotate this the other way. Okay. And scale it, stretch it out, scale it down to my desired shape. So let's imagine the cylinder is my curtain rod. I'm going to put it above my curtain. And then just like I did with my nCloth, I'm going to add some subdivisions into my cylinder too. Then I'm going to make it my passive collider. And now I am ready. Okay. So again, if I don't add these constraint points, even if I like put the cylinder and the cloth together, and when I press play, it's just going to fall down because this cloth has nothing to hold on to. So to change that, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to make these two connect. Then I'm going to switch into vertex mode. And I'm going to select these top vertices that are technically supposed to be touching the cylinder. So I select those. And then I'm going to shift select the cylinder. And then on the top toolbar here, I'm going to click on End Constraint. And I'm going to choose Point to Surface. Once that completes, my vertices turn into color green, and that means that it should be working. So when I click play on the bottom here, my curtain is successfully hung on the rod. It's connected, and that way it won't fall off. So to create the curtain, let's say you like open a curtain and it's all scrunched up towards the end. You can also achieve that effect on Maya. But to do that, we will need to add in keyframes. So let's say I want to go to keyframe 40. I'm going to click on my keyboard, I'm going to click on S. And then I'm going to scale down. Wait, that didn't create my key. There we go. You have to see this red line pop up, and that means that you've created a keyframe. Then I'm going to move further down my timeline, I don't know, 70, and scale down my curtain rod. Click S. And when I play, I should see the fabric scrunching in together. So I'm just going to make sure it's at the beginning. Press play. And that way, now I have my curtains scrunched up. So this way you have this texture of like curtains have been messed with. And if you want to keep the object as is, again, you can duplicate it and move it to the side. And when you click restart, your original nCloth and collider are essentially reset. You still have this shape that you created previously, and you can add in new keyframes to make a new design. Why can't I scale this down? So let's say this one I don't want it to be so scrunched up. I'm just going to scale it down a little bit. When I press play, I get a different effect. And again, if you want to keep that shape, you Control D, move over the copy. And now you have curtains. Or planes that have been manipulated to look like curtains. So that's one of the other cool tricks that you can do with nCloths. So if you remember in my bed model, let me just render this so you can see it better. And press play. So this is what, wait, let me change the screen because you can't see that. So when I render my image, this is what it looks like. This is my bed, and if you haven't noticed, it doesn't have a pillow. And what's nice about the video game is that it's supposed to be this like nomadic village. So I figured maybe they didn't have pillows and kind of got away with it. But you can actually create pillows using nCloths as well, and it's actually pretty simple. So let's go ahead and create a pillow. We'll make a new scene. This time around, I'm going to create a cube, scale it up. Oops, wrong one. Add divisions. That's too much. Okay. Let's say I wanted to make one of those body pillows. So I'm just going to make this rectangle shape, squish it down. Make it a little bit smaller, that's too big. And I make sure that I'm in the FX tab, and I'm going to make this into an nCloth. I'm going to go into the attribute editor. And so right now, this is going to act like a fabric. If I press play, it's just going to fall down as if it was a fabric. And the reason it falls down is because Maya actually has gravity calculated. And so for this simulation, for my pillow that I want to make, I actually don't need gravity because I'm not going to be dropping my pillow onto anything. So to get rid of my gravity, in my attribute editor, I'm going to go into the nCloths tab. And on the bottom where it says gravity and wind, here's the value for gravity. This is the gravity we have on Earth. I'm just going to input 0 for that value. And this way I shouldn't have any gravity. And when I press play, my pillow doesn't fall. And now to make my fabric into a pillow, I'm going to go to the pressure tab that's in the attribute editor. Where is it? Right here. Open it up. And just like my friction and stickiness when I was making the cloth, I'm just going to increase my pressure. Press play. And it should inflate my cloth into a pillow. I can mess around with that until I get the desired effect. Let's say that was too much. Let's say I wanted a really tiny pillow. I can just lower the pressure and such. And that's how you make a pillow. So to save this, again, you can either just duplicate your object, move it to the side, and delete the old nCloth. Or, in this case, since I won't be using my nCloth again, I just wanted to make a pillow, I can just select my nCloth and delete my history. And once I do that and I click on the replay button, it shouldn't revert back into the rectangle that I once had because it's not an nCloth anymore. I cannot animate it, I cannot play it back, and it's just a shape. It's a shape that my nCloth left behind. And if I click on the number 3, I would get a preview of what it would look like with the softer edges. And that's how you make a pillow. And you could add this virtually to any shape. Let me move this one back, I need it. If you want to make smaller pillows, you can do it the same thing, but the same process that I just showed you. The only thing that you would essentially change is how you shape this cube or whatever object that you have before making it into an nCloth. Wait, I don't know why I had so many subdivisions into this, so it's not a cloth anymore. Squish it down. Go into attribute. Oh wait, I have to make this into an nCloth. Yes, make it into an nCloth. Increase pressure. Press play. And it fills up your pillow for you. So again, I'm going to get rid of the nCloth of this pillow that I made. I select my nCloth, click delete history, freeze my transformations. And now, that way I just have the shape that I left behind, and now I am free to mess with it or tweak it if I wish. So for example, if I go into vertex mode, I can start tweaking whatever aspects I don't like, as if it was just simple mesh, since it's no longer an nCloth. You can mess around with it. And that's how you make a pillow. So nCloths are pretty versatile. You can make a lot of objects with these. And they're a good shortcut to make various objects. For example, I could have probably just as well achieved this pillow with a cube and just pushing in the vertices or extruding faces or so forth. But it is much quicker to make one with an nCloth. So it's just a cool shortcut to know, especially when you, for example, in my case, if I needed to make a bed and I wanted to decorate it, I can use nCloths to make the bed sheets, blankets, pillows, even the curtains in the room. And since I already deleted the history and it's just an object at this point, it's no longer an nCloth. Again, I can go ahead and click File, Export All, or Export Selection. If you just want this one pillow, then click Export All. Name your file, and you select your type. In this case, since I only have essentially the geometry of my pillow, I can just stick to the OBJ export. But if I had a texture or an animation, then I would choose FBX in that case. So I could preserve those features. But I don't, it's just the geometry. I'm gonna keep that as is, and I'm gonna export as an object. And that is the introduction to nCloths. They're pretty useful, and you can create really quick models in less than 3 minutes once you get the hang of it. You just have to remember to have your model select the nCloth selected, delete the history. Or another way is to duplicate your object. That way you only are exporting the shape of your nCloth and not the whole animation.